Extremism is the madness that is destroying our country today. Luckily, we have a hero, and it's not who you might think. It's Jon Stewart, the rational, chill dude, who, while still popular among a lot of people, is kind of dated in the modern context. Or is he? Our democracy is meant to be run slowly and incrementally, with small changes in legislation that keep power in check, and Jon is one of the few people who behaves in simpatico with that vibe, something that has become actually dated in modern times. Jon Stewart, the famous comedian, recently returned to host The Daily Show, the satirical TV show that brought him into the public spotlight years ago, and so far he has only been on 4 times, but he has been quite impactful in my opinion. Jon is interesting because he has the capacity to boil down complex issues into easy to understand points. He injects humor into stressful, long-winded topics, which is important that given these days, most people have the attention span of hyperactive chipmunks. But most importantly, he is rational, level-headed, and good-hearted. He's kind of an ordinary guy, and I say this because I've met other guys who are like him. His rhetoric and coverage of issues nowadays is seen as being antiquated, but then, to be fair, so is democracy, which is exactly why we need him right now. Jon Stewart's rationalistic, methodical way of thinking makes him one of the few public figures that is still compatible with our democracy while being relevant in these extreme times. In each episode so far, Jon has taken topics that in the last few years, despite them being part of the American conversation for decades, now feel like impossible quagmires. Immigration, Israel-Palestine, crappy journalists, elections with feeble candidates. This is all stuff we've seen before and it hasn't destroyed America. But in the last few years, it feels like all of these things will destroy America, and that's not a good thing. He's managed to speak the truth, be funny, and remain relevant. His incredulous attitude is very much rooted in the fact that he genuinely cares. In the age of AI, tech, and performative living on social media and in real life, seeing a man who will cry on the air after losing his dog feels refreshing and authentic. His opinions aren't fake, and he comes from a place of love, not of fear. And unfortunately, this makes him the opposite of most media these days. If you read the comments on his videos, most people are just excited to see him back. Yet on Twitter and in the news, he's getting some hate because he's not on the same wavelength. Of course, nowadays, there is no such thing as responsible journalism. It's just about getting clicks. Everyone from Trump's niece to the Times of Israel has been taking shots at him, from his scathing criticism of Biden to his proposed idea for peace in the Middle East. And they may have some valid points, but he's not perfect, and he's a comedian. Would it be nice to have him take on the nonsense of the left a little bit more sometimes? Sure. But again, he's a comedian, and he's gonna do what's funny first. Is he actually gonna have policy solutions for us? No. He's a comedian. But between him and John Oliver, it is sad that these are the people who are telling the truth. But to be fair, the medieval archetype of the court jester is at play here. The guy who made fun of the king, but often told the truth. In a way, we're living through the real-life version of Man of the Year. It's strange. Comedians are doofuses, but they're often the most sincere people. Yet that doesn't stop the trash opinions from rolling in. In his second episode, Jon highlighted Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin and how messed up it was that Tucker was mooning over Putin in Russia, and some random news outlet just couldn't help but compare him to Tucker. It boggles the mind, though, that Jon would be the first to say that they have the right to say that if they believe it because he believes in democracy and freedom of the press. It doesn't make sense, though, because Tucker is literally interviewing Putin in the most softball way, trying to make America, as Jon said, more comfortable with the concept of dictators. Whereas Jon's first episode was literally about how Biden is way too old to be running for president, a common concern among some Democrats these days. He very much supports democratic norms, like telling the truth and discussing everything relevant in an election. But he shouldn't have to be the person who's talking about these things. Part of the reason why Republican outlets can convince America that Biden is a puppet or double or some other nonsense is because more mainstream outlets don't discuss concerns of his age. It's worth talking about, because otherwise people will think Trump is more capable and vote for him without even realizing that they're only a few years apart in age. Putting them side by side, making similar age-related gaffes, puts them on a level playing field. In doing so, one could even argue that Jon is putting America on a level playing field. We're all going to be voting for one old guy or another. Maybe we are all in the same country after all, participating in the same system, even if it feels so different from a racial, geographical, and social perspective. The media very much seeks to divide us these days. I'm not sure if that's on purpose, but it's definitely happening, which is another thing that a lot of people in the country would likely agree upon. What critics of The Daily Show don't seem to understand is that we are living in a climate of dangerous extremism. It's a climate of disruption, one that is incompatible with American democracy in 2 important ways. 1, this world breeds anxiety, and members of the media know this. It gets people voting and protesting and excited about everything from the most nonsensical causes to the most relevant. The media and the political system these days causes us to feel so anxious about everything. Issues that have been on the table for decades are now cause for endless fear and panic. Regardless of whether things are really that bad, that anxiety ensures that we will never think rationally. If, when you Google any subject matter to educate yourself on, you see only anxiety-provoking articles on the subject matter, then you will believe whatever they are telling you, facts be damned. If you've ever suffered from real anxiety, not just the general stuff, but like a full-on panic attack with all of the fun physical symptoms, you know that you cannot think rationally in that moment, because it literally pulls blood into your lizard brain, the fight or flight response that is the deepest part of our brains. The lizard brain is what has kept us alive in ancient times, but now it's running haywire, overly stimulated by things like cable news. No matter what Fox News says, immigrants are not going to overrun your town and destroy everything in sight. This is not an apocalypse film, because, this is point number 2, American democracy is incrementalist. Everyone complains about how hard it is to get anything done, but then we're also supposed to live in fear of the fact that some political issue is going to endanger us and destroy our lives in the next 5 minutes. But that's the beautiful thing about anxiety. It doesn't have to make sense. And let's add some context to that statement, because large-scale climate events like tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, winter storms, those can in fact kill you in a matter of moments. But we shouldn't be doing anything to prepare for that. I'm not even talking about climate change legislation. I'm just talking about seawalls or even better electric grids, just being prepared, because these kinds of disasters seem to keep happening. Democratic incrementalism is supposed to keep power balanced and keep us from being in crisis, but it doesn't always seem compatible with human nature, which seems to like kings and singular strong leaders. Our democracy is actually very boring, but that's why it works. Mundane things done slowly over time, the fight between lobbyists and advocates. Our political system is defined by the boring and the slow. Well, I shouldn't say that. Some people do find it interesting. The people in my high school civics and history classes mostly just fell asleep. But this is a great thing, because it means that we have norms, stable institutions, and ease. No one group of people or leader can decide to suspend the government or bomb US citizens. And yes, I know, the Supreme Court. Don't even talk about it, please. Regardless, A24's Civil War looks like a great movie, but it's likely a long shot, which makes some people sad, because as the Daily Show reported, some people do want a civil war. Democracy is a beautiful thing, but I'm not sure everyone wants it anymore. Unfortunately, and this is just my opinion, so please don't get mad unnecessarily, but the real reason people don't like Jon Stewart and think that talking about Biden's age is dangerous, or why Tucker Carlson is interviewing Putin, is because on some level, there is a will to destroy democracy. It's not something we could ascribe to any one person or group, but rather a feeling in the collective consciousness of America. Democracy feels slow and unfeeling to the plight of working people who are struggling. It's not an illogical thought to recognize that our system is often bureaucratic. Both sides have valid complaints about the failures of our system. Democracy has its merits, though, but it seems that most people are genuinely suffering too much to care. Ultimately, you can say what you like, and Jon will be the first person to agree with your right to say it. We need conversations for democracy to thrive. That very aspect of democracy is sacrosanct. And it's funny, because it doesn't matter which side of the conversation you are on. You're probably censoring someone else in some way. We're not allowed to discuss certain things, even if we're coming from a rational place. Why is no one talking about real solutions for any of the policy issues happening right now? Why aren't we reaching across the aisle? Instead, we just pick a side and start railing. Who even decides the position? Who decided that young people would be for Gaza and old people would support Israel? Shouldn't we all just be interested in ending the whole thing? Shouldn't we just be appalled by the whole concept of cyclical violence and never-ending war? Now, in some ways, this lack of communication and conversation might be because of how dangerous certain kinds of speech can be nowadays, how easy it seems to be to whip people into a mob, but a lot of it is fine and necessary. Jon Stewart is actually talking about such things, and I'm glad he is. He retired when I came of age, and I could have really used him. Listening to him nowadays makes me feel a lot less alone. Is he covering every single fact of every situation? No. But again, it's more about just finding someone who believes in democracy still. I, like many young people, have worked hard to control my anxiety, to the point where I pretty much stopped reading the news or politics outside of just checking headlines to see what god-awful calamity may befall us all next after the 2016 election. Finding substantive, rational analysis has just been getting harder and harder, and I basically just gave up. It's sad that this is as close as we will get to someone reporting the news in a basic and relaxed way. Jon's the only person I've seen in recent years talking in a rational way, like we're supposed to in a democracy. And a democracy is meant to be adversarial. We're all supposed to want the same thing and argue for it in different ways. But instead, we've ended up with a system in which the country is a pie that we're all fighting for. Who gets the most or the least, what's fair as a piece of pie for one group or another. The way we're acting, we might as well be in a civil war already. There doesn't have to be physical fighting to have a country that is being destroyed by divisions. Family members fighting among one another, families broken up over ideological divisions. I've seen it personally. We may not be losing limbs on the battlefield, but people are definitely losing their peace of mind over arguments. We have an ex-president that behaves like he's got his own government in his own cap, and there is a sense of division across political lines. In this case, a variety of issues rather than just slavery. There is little political will to put the country back together in a meaningful way. We might not be trying to get a divorce, but if America is a couple, then we're definitely separated emotionally. Someone like Jon Stewart has the capacity to put things back together. The fact that his show airs on cable and then is uploaded to YouTube later that same evening means that he's reaching people from all sides.
I'm your host, Jon Stewart, captain of this dying medium. I'm so happy to be here. You know your television is dying. I said I am aware, and in fact, I'm contributing to it.
I mean, okay, to be fair, he is a comedian. He only has so much power. So maybe we must take some responsibility and reach across the aisle. But right now, we're not even having those conversations. Because authenticity, sincerity, kindness, and decency are gone from politics. I, unfortunately, did not get to grow up in a time where sensationalism was minimized and analysis was the norm. For a few years of my life, I had the capacity to read the newspaper, at first daily and then on Sundays, and actually learn about the world. Between Marmaduke and Zits in the funny pages, I remember feeling like I understood the world, and that there was hope for the future. And that while people disagreed on what course of action to take on a problem, there was at least a discussion about it. That's all been gone for years now. And like many people in my age group, comedians offer more of the emotional result of what reading analysis used to than the so-called real news does. It's not just the bias or the money that goes into the news that makes it feel less like analysis or discussion, and more like clear propaganda for its masters. It's the complete lack of heart. Ultimately, you can dislike Jon Stewart for whatever reason. Maybe he's too leftist. Maybe his analysis isn't particularly substantive. Maybe he's just gotten too ugly for you. It's all fine. But I'm just grateful that someone out there is being chill for a change. That even if I don't know every aspect and facet of a discussion, someone is at least trying to have some kind of a conversation. It might be flawed and missing information, but that's not what he's trying to achieve. Because truly, it's just nice to see something that makes me feel hopeful for a change. Thank you so much for watching. Now please don't make me turn off the comments like with the Trump one. I like to know what people think, and your validation gives me the strength to keep going in the face of my crippling fear. So please comment, like, subscribe,